Lovesey, an unforgettable odyssey brimming with witches, ancient secrets, dark deeds, and magical adventures. Part 1. The Howling Lands and the Deadliest Winter. Welcome. The shadowy world of the creature witch is as far removed from that of human witchery as it is from the small Nordic islands where they once lived. Whilst certain similarities are obvious, hats, brooms, robes, wands, cauldrons, covens and spells, here it pays to look into history. For it was creature witches who first adopted these now familiar trappings, human witches subsequently appropriating them afterwards. Indeed, without the creature witches, many of the things most associated with witchcraft might never have seen the light of a dark and treacherous day. For instance, it was the smaller, furrier creature witches who first made and wore pointed hats, the conical design serving two functions, various lengths and patterns signalling different covens, whilst the wide brim provided protection from the driving winds and rain. It was creature witches who first fashioned round cauldrons, spotted the potential for flight by broom, soon mastering the skill to rule the skies. In fact, more or less everything we associate with our witches is taken from the creatures. But who were they? And more importantly, what was their story? This much we know. Creature witches first appeared some 1400 years ago in a small covens on the many islands in and around Scandinavia. To this day, their language of parlour witch still contains many Nordic influences, affirming their ancient roots to this cold, unforgiving region. Whilst many details remain as elusive and frustrating as the witches themselves, early traces of these strange creatures can still be found in ancient Norse poems telling of epic Viking journeys in storm-tossed seas, when a fearful crew of raiders sailed too close to a dark rocky outcrops they knew as the Howling Lands. Tamar, warrior chief of Ramarichi, took to icy seas and daring its currents swept to pass his men's by the Howling Lands, where Odin's foul sisters raged and wept. Their screams would rip the strongest sail, and in the air they flew on sticks, and Tamir knew his men would fail if lured ashore by such deadly tricks. It's not known how many Viking longboats were wrecked by such deadly tricks, but the Vikings held a healthy respect for the foul sisters. Some experts even suggest the warlike figureheads on their longboats were originally carved to frighten creature witches away and give safe passage between the islands. Whatever the truth of the matter, it seems marauding Vikings quickly learned to literally steer well clear of the smaller witches, a wise precaution. Today, the same islands are no longer home to the creature witches, their fortunes changed by the unwelcome arrival of a cruel, unforgiving winter that would forever be remembered for its unrelenting harshness, pushing the witches to the very brink of survival, testing their magical prowess and dividing them with bitter discord. During such times, one creature witch was to stand tall and rise above the others, to become one of the most legendary figures at the centre of the League of Lid-Curving Witchery. Algarin, the famed warrior witch, who led her black-hatted sisters across the icy siege to forge new beginnings in faraway lands. The Spuddle, or Tale of Algarin. 1400 years ago, amidst a cruel and dark winter, A line of robed figures in pointed hats make their way slowly across a snow-covered beach towards a captured Viking longboat a short way out in the chopping grey surf. Waves swell and break under the heavy sky as sheeting rain slakes the shore, stinging the creatures' faces. Some stumble and have to be helped, others stand further back on the shoreline, watching their fellow sisters slowly unfurl the large sail, the wind insistently tearing at the bindings, turning the boat for the seas beyond. Both parties begin to chant. Offerings are left on the shore to wish the voyagers luck, whilst those on the longboat can only look back as their homelands recede, wondering if they'll ever return. The great crossing had finally begun. It was the winter that would only ever be remembered by the lucky few that Algarin chose for the journey, the small band of creature witches and familiars that set sail with her. The others would starve and perish, their bodies frozen in deep snows that would cover the islands for many months to come. Most likely knew their fate the moment the longboat left the windswept shore. In that one bleak instant, an era ended, those about to perish watching the chosen few embark on a journey that would one day establish the beginnings of the League of Lidker in Witchery. But such thoughts were far from Algarin's mind as she stood in the prow of the ship, freezing winds tossing her long red hair. Instead, her mind raced with the dangers of the journey ahead. What great beasts would they encounter in these unforgiving seas? Would the magical lands her mother spoke of really exist? And if so, what waited for them there? All Algarin had were her warrior's instincts, a deft blend of savagery and cunning that had built her fearsome reputation in the Howling Lands, a name that she herself could take sole credit for hers were the howls that had lured others to their grisly demise. Born to Ragnhilda, a solitary creature witch, Algarin had soon learned her mother's skills for survival. Not belonging to any coven, the life of a solitary witch was one of constant vigilance. With food in short supply, the covens hunted as voracious packs. Any living creature was seen as food, including solitary creature witches. Often covens would battle amongst themselves, uneasy truces frequently broken as they searched for ever more precious resources in the barren rocky islands. Great battles raged in the skies, dozens of witches taking to their brooms and vrooshing each other in the hope of strophing as many as possible. Some survived such many battles, while others fell horribly to their deaths, strothed, witches on the ground squabbling for the felled flesh, furs, robes, brooms, hats and wand. Hard times called for desperate measures. In between such deadly rivalry, solitary witches eked out an unseen existence. To be found risked a terrifying fate at the many cruel hands. Often taken to one of the many large caves inhabited by the covens, there the unfortunate solitary witch would be boiled alive in a large cauldron until the meat fell from her bones, whilst others jostled for a bowl of the dreadful soup that remained. Algarin knew every awful moment of the solitary ritual, having witnessed her own mother's death when she was captured by the infamous Longclaws, the most feared coven on the islands. Watching in the darkness a short distance from the cave, its mouth glowing from the flickering fire of the bubbling cauldron, her young eyes never left the awful spectacle, every scream seared into her memory as she swore terrible vengeance on them all. A full 5 years passed before, under a clear and cloudless night, Algarin walked into the Longclaws' cavern and slaughtered each and every one, not stopping until she ripped the final claw from their dead paws, storing them in a leather bag around her waist. The spuddle of Algarin the Fearless had begun. Word quickly spread amongst the other covens. All now dreaded a similar visit from the flame-haired solitary witch, and come she did, visiting each in turn, not a trace of fear in her eyes, easily dodging any Varushas fired her way from their wands. But this time, she came with gifts she'd taken from the Longclaws, their hats, brooms, robes, and wands of the dead. Fear soon turned to relief, as each coven collected their spoils. Overjoyed, Algrin hadn't exacted her wrath on them. And so it was that a once-hunted solitary creature witch became accepted into the previously forbidden world of coven witchery, able to move between all islands upon whatever whim possessed her, whatever bidding Algrin desired. She was both feared and revered. Occasionally, a foolish coven leader unwisely pitted her champion against her, only to be savagely rooshed and stroffed, either on land or in the air. For Algrin was exceptional at both, her mother having taught her well. She could strike faster and more accurately with a wand than any other witch on the island. On a broom, she could outmaneuver any rival at breakneck speeds. And whilst some coven witches knew the true reason for Algrin's vengeful glare, few ever dared speak aloud the fate that befell her mother. Those that did died with the words on their lips. None knew of the magical world far from the Howling Lands. This secret given to her by her mother remained with Algrin alone. At times she would sit on a rocky outcrop, staring out to sea, recalling her mother's words when she'd once taken her to the highest cliff and pointed far out over the icy seas. These lands, she told her, are nothing compared to what lies beyond. True, they are our home, but only because none has ever sought to seek another or look beyond these horizons. But there are other lands, full of so many different and magical things, and you, Algrin, will be the one who finds them. The moon will be your guide, for they cannot be reached by broom alone. Everything I have taught you will come to this. Algrin watched as her mother scattered runestones at their feet, reading them by the light of her wand in the still silvered night. It is foretold. You will make the journey without me. Come, there is much to do to prepare you for the twisliness that lies ahead. Your time will be upon you all too soon. And so it proved, as Algrin's mother was captured by the Longclaws soon after she had finished teaching her daughter all she knew. As she was led towards the horribly bubbling cauldron by the jeering coven, Ragnhilda simply smiled, knowing that if anyone would cross the icy seas, it would be her beloved daughter. But first, there was the small matter of the deadliest winter, and a boat. Of all the winters the creature witches had endured, the deadliest winter was by far the harshest. It swept in late one September like a vengeful dragon, breathing pure ice and freezing everything in its path. Trees fell apart, their heavy limbs cracking and dropping to the ground, already frozen hard as stone. Life on the small islands was decimated. The only hope was to try and survive around a fire in one of the caves, hoping it wouldn't be occupied by a coven of creature-hungry witches. As the winter deepened, Algrin knew the time had come to discover if the magical lands were anything more than an ancient spuddle. But how? No broom could ever fly that far. The witches were stuck, freezing and starving to death. Whatever spells and magic they possessed proved no match for the unending cold. But one day, just for a brief moment, the winds died and the snows stopped. Algrin left her shelter and headed through the frozen woodland to the high cliffs overlooking the icy seas. At the edge, she stopped, eyes narrowing, her curiosity drawn by something quite unexpected. A great sea dragon, its one wing unfurled above a vast body floating on the chopping waves. A menacing head sat on a short neck, the wide body flowing away to reveal a series of wooden legs appearing to walk over the water. It was like nothing she'd ever seen before, yet she knew it was a sign, and most importantly, one that had come from somewhere truly magical and far beyond all she could see, from over the distant horizon itself. Throughout that short winter's day, she excitedly tracked the dragon on her broom as it rounded each island. She began to wonder if it was lost and needed luring in. Occasionally her ears and nose would twitch as the sea breeze brought strange new sounds and smells. Sometimes she thought she heard chanting, as if many voices were calling out across the swell. Other times she picked up peculiar scents unlike she'd smelled before. Certainly, this strange dragon needed closer inspection, and taking to the skies, wand-drawn, Algarin flew out and boldly circled above the vast creature. Which was when her heart leapt. The dragon was a vessel, a huge boat, its wing catching the wind to guide it. The legs were moved by other smaller creatures with hard heads and horns, chanting as they went about their work. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the way she'd fulfill her destiny. The longship would be hers, and with it the prize of leaving these wretched islands once and for all. By nightfall she had a plan, and recruits from the covens to help her. They flew by brooms, some settling on the beach to light fires, others flying far out to sea, Algarin at the front, urging them on, drawing her wand against the wind and letting fly with the first Brusha, watching its blue bolt streak harmlessly into the waters, a short distance from the Viking ship. She hadn't missed, but instead struck precisely where she'd intended. The plan wasn't to destroy the vessel, but to drive it on shore, where her black-hatted sisters eagerly waited to deal with the peculiar creatures on board. Circling above, other witches let fly with their wands, Brusha screaming like comet tails into the pitch-black sea, the noise and fury so loud that those few who survived would forever know these islands as the Howling Lands from that night onwards. Panicking, the Vikings took to their oars, others desperately sending arrows up into the night to down the fearsome flying beasts above them. Some simply jumped overboard, terrified at the spectacle. In all their many voyages, none had witnessed anything like it. Odin's foul sisters had surely risen from Valhalla to take vengeance for wickedness on their part. Above, Algarin watched the chaos, calling the others away when the boat began to turn towards what he assumed was the safety of the shore. However, one witch hadn't heard, and in her enthusiasm made one final plunging dive, wand drawn. An arrow struck her. Hurtling towards the sea, she let one last Brusha fly, a lethal blue bolt striking the large sail and setting it ablaze before she crashed into the churning waters. Algarin knew her dream of escaping the islands was burning up before her widening eyes. As the flames turned the dark seas orange, she swooped down, landing on a blazing deck, and Brushed the last of the terrified Vikings before signaling the witches waiting on shore to wade out and grab the hull. Behind, others on brooms vrooshed the waters, creating swell to push the longship to the shadows, before it finally beached on the pebbled shore, just as the burning mast crashed into the breaking waves. They'd done it. Against all odds, the creature witches had captured a Viking longship, a deed that would be forever remembered in Norse folklore. Those Vikings that managed to make land in less hostile territories would forever tell of Odin's foul sisters that flew on sticks, whilst warning of the dangers of venturing too close to the Howling Lands. On shore, Algarin watched the creatures set about the spoils. There were chests full of exotic treasures and thick sealskins. Bodies were soon looted of weapons, shields, helmets and furs before tossed into fires. Flagons of mead and wine were eagerly seized, the witches squabbling for the choicest cuts of dried fish and drink. All the while, Algarin planned. Whatever lay beyond the dark horizon, it wouldn't be these witches she'd take with her. Weary of their savagery, she saw no sense in taking such creatures to new and magical lands. She watched as yet another dead Viking was tossed into the flames, a shower of bright red sparks spilling up into the night. Not for Algarin the spoils from this boat. For her it was the vessel itself, the chance it offered to leave the misery of her island life. But who to take with her? She needed others, a different kind of witch, reliable and trustworthy. But how to find them? Algarin couldn't decide, watching with a heavy heart as the soaking body of the drowned witch was pulled from the waves and hurled into the flames to a chorus of drunken cheers. The Howling Lands had no place for sentiment, but looking at the longship, Algarin knew the great vessel was her only hope to one day finding it in new and faraway lands. The Choosing. By next morning, word had spread of Alduin's great deed, the many island covens flying to the beach to stare in awe at the Twizzly sea dragon. The chaos of roaring brooms quickly roused other witches sleeping on the wet sand. Fearing a raid on their newly acquired plunder, many drew their wands to defend their valuable treasures and furs. Sensing trouble, Alduin sent a booming brucia high into the sky, its terrifying noise silencing all where they stood. And what a moment it was. Frozen in an ominous tableau of wide-eyed greed and aggression, it was the first time every coven witch had ever met in one place. The dangers were horribly obvious. All heads turned to Alduin, waiting to see what she'd say. She smiled, almost savouring the moment, with half a mind to simply leave and let them settle it by wands amongst themselves. Certainly, most would probably perish, but those that remained would undoubtedly be the most vicious and untrustworthy, less than ideal seafaring companions. Instead, she walked to the boat and climbed aboard, standing by the charred figurehead, wand drawn above her head. "Sisters!" she cried. "This dragon came to these shores from faraway lands. It brings supplies, furs, food and drink to help us through this splurked winter. But still the weakest amongst us won't survive. Our magic is no match for the moon turns ahead. Therefore I declare that some will venture with me upon the seas for different shores, new lands hidden beyond the horizon." The gusts swing the beach, witches shivering as biting cold tore through their furs. "Preparations need to be made," she continued. "A giant wing is needed to catch the wind. Food has to be foraged for the journey ahead, and there will be a choosing of those I will take over the icy seas alongside me. Therefore, in one moon turn's time, a contest will be held. Those who prove themselves worthy will journey with me." Alduin's mother had not only reared a great warrior witch, but a cunning one too, and her plans for a contest were far from what the creature witches might have expected. Thirsting for the chance to prove themselves the best flyers, wand wielders and spellcasters, each coven busily set about choosing its champion to represent their honour, practising their skills despite the icy weather. As such, their efforts were largely to be in vain. In the days leading up to the contest, Alduin travelled between the island covens, watching preparations. However, instead of assessing the champion, her warrior's eyes sought out those witches and familiars who looked most disinterested, or who busied themselves with more essential tasks like gathering food and wood for the fire. Those creature witches so keen to impress with their fighting skills were instantly dismissed from Alduin's mind, although she did nothing to quell their enthusiasm for the contest. A full month passed, and the covens assembled back on the beach where the Viking wreck still lay. Firstly, Alduin commanded the best flyers to set off on their brooms and return with the tallest, straightest tree they could find. When they did so, she scornfully mocked their efforts. "You were charged with returning the tallest, straightest tree, you splurks," she said, kicking the pile of trees on the sand. "That meant just one tree between you, not one tree each." Cold, exhausted witches looked to each other, knowing that none could ever work with the other. Alduin turned to another group, lurking towards the back of the crowd. "You there, trying to hide. Take to the lid. Return with the longest, straightest tree." A short while later, as the crowd huddled on the windswept shore, the small group returned, flying an enormous tree trunk between them, a triumph of skill, balance, strength and practicality. Alduin smiled as she addressed the successful witches. "I watched you when I came to your covens. None of you pay heed to individual glory, instead working quietly together for the benefit of your sisters. Such loyalty will now be rewarded. Together you have passed my flying task, and shall be the first to travel with me." The crowd began to mutter, the better flyers seething that they hadn't been selected. Alduin sensed the mood turning and quickly issued the next task, brandishing a broken oar from the longship and pointing to the smaller trees still lying on the sand. "Those must be made into oars. They must be smooth, strong and ready for the twizzliest seas." The remaining witches set about the task with savage and furious determination, squabbling to seize a tree and blast the freezing bark away with their wands, vrooshing any others who dared to get close. Just as before, Algarin quietly selected another group at the back of the crowd and set them to the same task on the larger tree. "This will be the main mast," she quietly told them. "Make it sturdy and straight to survive the harshest storm." They did so, working together in the surrounding chaos, using their familiars to clear away stroughed bark and branches as they smoothed the clean trunk with their wands, then carried it up into the longship and lashed it upright. "It'll need a wing," one told Algarin, "to catch the wind." "Indeed it will," she agreed. "What is your name?" The witch frowned slightly. "Utard. Why?" "Because, Utard, you and your fellow sisters will make such a wing and travel alongside me to the magical islands." "And if we have no desire to do so?" "You have no desire to live somewhere new?" Algarin pointed at the beach where the others still squabbled and fought over broken trees. "You desire to spend the last of your moon turns freezing and dying with sisters such as these?" Utard thought, watching snow clouds gathering ominously on the darkening horizon. "We'll need food, familiars, furs, and more luck than has ever been granted to any witch ever." Algarin fixed her in the eye. "All we need, Utard, is to believe." You have been listening to The League of Lip-Curving Witchery by Phil and Jacqui Lovesey, adapted for your audio enjoyment by Ursula Brifthofen-Stoltz and Phil Lovesey, who would like to point out that no creature witches were harmed during the making of this Magicast. For more information about creature witches, the League, Matlock the Hare and the Magical Dales, simply visit www.matlockthehare.com.